Welcome to the first episode of our brand new series on the channel. Y'all voted and you chose the new series. In the History of series, we go through the history of different college football programs in a multi-part series. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel, as well as letting me know which school you want to see in future episodes. Now let's adventure back to 1869. Due to being one of the teams to play in the first ever game of college football, and due to the fact that I'm originally from New Jersey, I thought it'd be perfect to have the first set of episodes focus around Rutgers football. The first college football game occurred on November 6th, 1869, between Rutgers and New Jersey, who would later be known as Princeton, in New Brunswick, New Jersey, in front of about 100 people. The game played that day was much different than the one we know and consider football today. Each school fielded a team that consisted of 25 players, and they played under what can be considered more rugby-like rules. One Rutgers player described the game as replete with surprise, strategy, prodigies of determination, and physical prowess. The Rutgers captain, whose name was William J. Leggett, recommended the two schools play under the rules from the London Football Association. Leggett would later become a distinguished clergyman of the Dutch Reformed Church. Princeton's captain William Gummier, who later became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of New Jersey, accepted Leggett's proposal. Now, how did this game come together? Well, Rutgers and Princeton are located about 20 miles apart, and as a result, they had an intense rivalry. They competed for the possession of the old Revolutionary cannon. They would take the cannon from each other at night and lug it back and forth from the opposing schools. Princeton stopped this by putting the cannon in concrete, as well as beating Rutgers in baseball by a close score of 40-2. I hope you sense the sarcasm. Rutgers was angry about this game and wanted to get revenge to square things away. Rutgers issued a challenge to Princeton that they would play 3 games in 1 year. The first would be played at Rutgers, the second would be played at Princeton. The first matchup, also known as the first college football game, took place at 3 p.m. with 50 total players and 100 spectators. The spectators sat on a low wooden fence to watch the game. The players' uniforms consisted of hats, coats, vests, and they used suspenders as belts. To distinguish the Rutgers players and fans, they donned scarlet scarves. The way they positioned themselves was really interesting in my opinion. 2 players on each team remained stationary near their opponent's goal line in hopes to slip a score past the defense. The remaining 23 players were divided into 2 groups, fielders and bulldogs. 11 players lined up as fielders and served as the team's defense, while the remaining 12, the bulldogs, played a more offensive position. Each score counted as a game, and they were going to play a total of 10 games. Following each score, the teams changed direction. You could only move the ball by kicking it or batting it down the field with your feet, hands, heads, or sides. Rutgers had small players who were faster, while Princeton had bigger players who were slower. One player was quoted saying, "Though smaller on the average, the Rutgers players, as it developed, had ample speed and fine football sense. Receiving the ball, our men formed the perfect interface around it, and with short, skillful kicks and dribbles drove it down the field. Taken by surprise, the Princeton men fought valiantly, but in 5 minutes we had gotten the ball through to our captains on the enemy's goal, and 2 players neatly kicked it over. None thought of it, so far as I know, but we had, without previous plan or thought, evolved the play that became famous a few years later as the flying wedge." Rutgers was having great success with the wedge until J.E. Michaels, aka Big Mike, broke through the wedge. He did not attempt to take the ball, but instead wanted to break Rutgers' wedge. Big Mike consistently broke the Scarlet Knights' wedge, and Princeton was able to tie the game up with a kick themselves for the second score. One player said, "The flying wedge was thus checkmated. Rutgers might have been in a bad spot had not Madison Bell come through. He had a trick of kicking the ball with his heels. All the game he had been a puzzle to the Princetonians. The ball would be rolling towards the Rutgers goal, and, running ahead of it instead of taking time to turn, he would heel it back." He made several such plays, greatly encouraging his team. Then he capped all of this by one tremendous lucky backwards drive directly to Dixon, standing squarely before Princeton's goal. Dixon easily scored, giving us a 1-goal lead. Big Mike again rose, however, in a berserk endeavor, and getting the ball, he called the Princeton men into a flying wedge of their own, and straight away they took the ball right down the field and put it over. After that, one Rutgers professor shrieked, "You will come to no Christian end." Rutgers scored the 5th and 6th points. Later in the game, the ball would land near the fence where the students were sitting, and 2 players rammed into the fence, knocking it down and the students along with it. Then an unknown Rutgers player scored on his own team accidentally, and Princeton held on to the momentum and scored again, tying the game 4-4. Due to having smaller players, Leggett decided to have his team keep the ball close to the ground, and it worked as Rutgers scored the 9th and 10th points to win the matchup 6-4. An article about the game showed up in Rutgers' undergraduate newspaper, the Targum, and said to describe the varying fortunes of the match game by game would be a waste of labor, for every game was like the one before, wrote the student reporter. There was the same headlong running, wild shouting, and frantic kicking. What happened after the first game is still unknown until today. One Princeton player said that Rutgers had run the losing team out of town. The local newspaper reported that the two teams came together and ate dinner after the game. This is the account that is believed to be true. Each school won the matchup that was played at their respective schools, and unfortunately the third game would not be played due to a crisis of overemphasis by the faculty at both institutions, who believed the games were distracting the students from their schoolwork. The following season, Rutgers got Columbia University, located in New York City, to play against them, and over the next few years, most of the colleges and universities in the East were playing the game known as football. No one knew where the game of football was going to go in the early years, and no one could have predicted where it was going to go over the next 151 years. Football scheduling was inconsistent, as some years Rutgers was able to schedule 10 games, like in 1882, while other years they could only play one game, like in 1885. Throughout this series, we will look into college football programs, some older than others, and look back at their history. I am so excited to create this series for y'all, and if you want to see part 2 of Rutgers or the history of any college football program, leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel.